Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. By the 1950s, sci-fi had taken Hollywood by storm, with all manner of tales involving man exploring the galaxy or various intergalactic neighbors swinging down to our neck of the woods for a visit. Meanwhile, juvenile delinquent pics became all the rage following the 1955 smash Rebel Without a Cause, with misunderstood teenagers already flocking to the drive-ins to see their on-screen counterparts and giant monster flicks. Entrepreneur Jack H. Harris hit upon the idea of combining the two elements. The resulting film, 1958's The Blob, became an instant sensation, making back its modest budget many times over, as well as generating a top 40 hit on the radio with its catchy title tune, as well as launching the career of a young upcoming actor, Steve McQueen, to superstardom. 30 years later, horror sci-fi enthusiasts Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont, who had met on the set of the 1981 slasher Hell Night, decided to update the script for The Blob and pitched it to Harris, who was more than receptive to the idea of a remake, especially during the heyday of practical special effects. The resulting effort was gorier, meaner, and more spectacular in every way, and has become recognized as one of the most impressive remakes to come out of the 1980s, ranking alongside The Fly and The Thing. Tonight we'll discuss both films with another impressive panel of guests from coast to coast, as well as a dash of international flavor. Please welcome my guests, Daniel Ekholm, Mark Easted, Chelsea David, and John Kitley. And we are here to talk about The Blob, 1958, and The Blob, 1988, celebrating their 65th and 35th anniversary. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Let's chat.
Let's talk about all things Blob. Let me start with you, John. When did you come across the original Blob for the first time?
The first time I came across part of the film was on TV, probably in the late 1970s, watching it on my little 13-inch TV, and it scared the crap out of me so bad that every time the Blob showed up, I turned it off. And then a few minutes later, I turned it back on. And the last part I got to is once the doctor got it, I hadn't seen the rest of the movie for a long time because it just, I don't know why, but it scared the crap out of me. So years later on VHS, I finally got around to watching the whole thing. It really comes back to just that whole thing of being consumed. And that freaked me out as like a 14-year-old, 13-year-old kid.
Let's bounce down to Daniel. When was the first time you saw the original?
I think it was in 2008. It's the same time I started to watch this October challenge thingy. So I watched all the 50s classic, all the Hammers, all the Universal movies and everything. And then I come across the Blob, and the thing is with the Blob, I thought to myself, this is not just a movie with this perfect hero and with the beautiful woman and everything. This is some teenagers, and it's more different than the others.
The title song kind of sets the tone as that this is going to be fun, but it's also a monster movie, and I think that's kind of appealing to that teen crowd. You got kind of like the rock and roll pop title song, which wasn't, your classic Hammer, right, with the orchestral. This was very much appealing to the youth market. Mark?
Mine was a little bit similar to John's. I mean, I wasn't terrified of it as a kid. I think I more saw it in snippets throughout the 80s, just catching pieces of it here and there. So I can't tell you the first time I saw the whole thing. But I remember having this weird mix of about the special effects, that they were really fake looking, but still really cool looking. which is kind of this weird thing. But for 1958, they on a low budget, they did pretty well. And even as a horror fan, I kind of came to the realization that I was a horror fan a little bit later in life. Looking back, I should have known. So some of these I came to later. So I probably didn't see the whole thing in one sitting until later on. But
And Chelsea, I saved you for last because I know you had your most recent experience with your first time.
Yeah, I was about to say, it was really a long time ago, about 2 days ago is when I first saw it. Yeah, but it very much seems like something I should have seen when I was about 13 or 14, when I started getting into horror films with my grandmother. It should have been then, but it definitely was 2 days ago. And I just absolutely am so glad that it's recent. All of my notes are very much like in real time. This is what I thought at that moment. Let me just write it down. It was fantastic.
Steve McQueen, being our lead, I mean, for all of us, he was already a superstar when we encountered this film. So going back and kind of seeing his humble beginnings, where he's the oldest teenager on record. I think he was 27 when he shot this.
Yeah.
But then again, all of the teenagers are way too old to be teenagers.
This was my first Steve McQueen film.
Oh my gosh.
I'm really glad that it is because I'm so glad that it is because it's one of his first films, right?
It's his first lead. Yeah.
So
Well, this actually led to his TV show. Like he got the lead in
Oh,
Wanted
really?
Dead or Alive. Well, his films do get better from here.
Yeah.
believe it or not.
I totally know that. Yeah. Just seeing the credits.
He got better for sure.
I'm personally glad that this was my introduction because it's only going to go up.
Steve McQueen was notoriously a difficult actor on most of his sets, and he was even difficult here in his first lead. I was listening to the commentary, and they talk about how he had a dog that he had to bring to set with him every day, and it was hot and where they were filming, and so he would bring his dog into the studio, and the dog would be making noise while they were doing takes, and they'd have to reshoot. And I think they wanted Steve McQueen to do their next film, Irwin Yeaworth, the director, and Jack Harris, the producer, but they were like, nah, he's just too much trouble.
yeah, I heard that he like chain smoked as well. And there's a scene at like minute 49 where you could see a puff of smoke behind him. And they said it's because he literally had a lit cigarette in his hand behind his back.
Incredible.
And I did watch where you can see the puff of smoke.
John, have you ever been to Blob Fest?
No, I have not. It's one event that I've been wanting to go to since I became aware of it. I've had a friend go to it, and it's, if you guys don't know, it's at the actual Colonial Theater where in the film they're showing where the blob attacks. So they reenact that. Not only do you get to see the blob in the actual theater, but then you get to come running out of the theater screaming, and they film that. So
Incredible.
yeah, it would be, I mean, just to see that film in the actual theater would be pretty stellar, even though that's not the film they're watching, obviously, but be a hell of a lot more entertaining than Daughter of Horror, that's for sure.
Hey, I like Daughter of Horror.
You have fun with that.
I do have fun with that. But I think they also have like a bucket of the original Blob, like, all 2 gallons of it.
Yeah, it's still in existence. I have seen that at one of the earlier Monster Bash conventions I went to. The guy that was the keeper of the Blob, it had in like a 5-gallon bucket, and it was still there. And
the original Blob, I mean, it is like, it's a silicone, and it starts off clear. When we first have our first encounter with it, it comes down kind of in a meteorite, and the old man, played by Olin Howland, kind of pokes it with a stick, and it opens up, and then we see like the blob kind of glom onto the stick, and then kind of creep its way up toward his hand. It starts off clear, right? But then becomes redder and redder the more people it consumes.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me that he pokes it with a stick. Like every movie. Why are you poking it?
You would totally poke it with a stick. Don't lie.
You don't want to use your hand.
That's right. You don't know where that's been. Well, and that opening has been homaged in several films. Killer Clowns from Outer Space has almost a replica of that opening scene of an old guy and his dog that, you know, they see something land and they go and check it out.
Yeah, even in Creepshow, the Jordy Verrill episode with
Right,
the
yep.
meteor, granted he uses a little extending measuring tape or a ruler.
And I like that his hair was all a mess, so we're, you know, very aware that he's the crazy old coot.
Right. That nobody's going to believe, right?
Right.
Well, and he doesn't really have the chance to really tell much of his story. You know, he's already kind of incapacitated. And so it's left to our two heroes, Steve McQueen playing a character named Steve. What's his girlfriend's name?
Annetta Corso. Oh, her real name?
What's the character?
Jane Martin.
Jane, right. They are left to try and explain this fantastic story to the local police. And of course, the adults aren't going to listen to them.
Those meddling kids.
Yeah.
That's the problem I have watching this today is even with any of the older films, like in the 50s, how old the teenagers are. And you're just sitting there going, God, you got to be close to 30. You cannot be in high school.
You're the same
right
age
now.
as the cop.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Maybe 5 years difference, maybe.
And it is interesting how stereotypical of the bad cop, the hoodlum kids that aren't really bad kids. They're just not understood, and the parents or the principals, and it's just like, oh my God, can we write that stereotype even thicker?
But that was what was appealing to you know, to the market. Like all these misunderstood teenagers were already at the drive-in watching themselves up on screen. Rebel Without a Cause kind of sparked that whole JD movement. And that was Jack Harris, the producer. That was his idea. It was like, well, how can we combine a monster movie and this juvenile delinquent movie and put them together? It's, as you said, John, it's kind of a stereotypical juvenile delinquent movie where, you know, they're not really bad kids. They're just misunderstood. And then you have this monster. And this monster is unlike any other monster we've seen, except for
That
was when did X the Unknown came out? Was that 57, 56?
I think it was 56.
Okay, so it preceded the Blob, actually. This kind of like amorphous, creeping menace. The Hammer film X the Unknown gave us something like that, but it wasn't in color.
And the difference in there, that one wasn't consuming people. That was just radioactive.
Yeah, this thing just like is a rolling, digesting machine. Yeah. The special effects were handled by Bart Sloan. And as you point out, Chelsea, like a lot of it was done with these miniatures and, you know, double imaging. And they would have, you know, they would put the miniature set and they would just kind of tip it and you would see it kind of like roll down, or they'd push it through the theater windows. I love that when it's kind of like rolling out of the door of the theater.
Yeah.
I like the fact that this was a malevolent I mean, it was looking for food. It was intelligent, and it was specifically looking to eat these people. How nobody could track this after a while seemed a little odd, but
so here's a question that occurred to me on this most recent viewing. You know, the old man pokes it with the stick and he gets this little bit, right? Where's the rest of the blob?
I think it grows with each person it eats. It gets
no,
bigger.
I know that, but it's like it's been separated. Like he takes the little bit.
Oh, you mean like
to the doctor?
Where's the rest of it out in space?
Where's the rest of it that's been sitting inside the meteorite? Like, is that thing like just running around on its own?
I don't know. Maybe what he poked out and brought out was the entire thing.
I don't know. Oh wait, there was another movie that was made.
Oh, in the 70s?
Was there really?
I don't know if you can call it a movie so much. One of the other things I like, they do a drag race and they do it backwards, and which is kind of fun, you know, the novelty in that, just seeing it go backwards. But if you're watching the film, you can notice that the exhaust is going into the tailpipes as opposed to out of the tailpipes, which I thought was hoot.
Was it just too dangerous to actually drive their cars backwards? The stunt coordinator said no to that.
Yeah.
Steve McQueen hadn't proven his driving abilities yet.
Yeah, that one wasn't exciting as Bullet.
It's worth noting, like, this was in the Criterion collection. This is number 91. Like, that's pretty early on in the Criterion collection, considering we're over 1,000 now. So, you know, it was deemed worthwhile, you know, by film aficionados. And I think this is kind of that quintessential 50s monster movie.
I mean, this is a highly original creature. This is like nothing that we really had seen before, or at least not here in the States. And it was completely different. It wasn't a guy in a suit, and it was going to consume you. It was going to eat you alive.
John alluded to the fact that the movie that they're watching in the movie theater is an actual movie. It's called Dementia, and then it was retitled and redubbed as Daughter of Horror. The original version of it, Dementia, is almost a wordless film. There's no dialogue, and it's very much kind of a dreamy nightmare quality. And then for the reissue, Jack Harris actually owned the rights to that film, and he redubbed it with Ed McMahon providing the narration. And that's his voice that you hear in the theater. And supposedly that's him with a sack over his head, like crossing the screen during that one moment where you just get a shot of the movie screen inside the theater.
And did you know that the poster for it in the theater is actually a Forbidden Planet poster?
I did see that.
They covered up the title with the vampire and the robot.
Which sounds like, kind of like one of those Mexican horror movies from the 60s and 70s.
Mummies.
Yeah. Anita Corso, she went on to become a TV star on the Andy Griffith Show. Jack Harris, this was his movie producing debut. And I forget who pointed it out, but this was kind of an independent feature. This was made with his own money and pretty low budget. I think like Steve McQueen was offered $2,500.
Yeah, $2,500.
$2,500 payment, or he could get a percentage. He's like, there's no way that the Blob is going to make any money. So, and it ended up making like, $4.5 million, on like a $100,000 or $150,000 budget. So it would have been a smart business move on his part.
Joke's on him.
Well, and he would people would constantly bring this movie up to him in interviews, and he would just kind of like, that thing, I don't want to talk about it.
I had read too that it was financed and stuff by a religious organization.
Right. Yeah.
They made a bunch of religious and educational films, and somehow, I don't know, they convinced them that somehow this movie was going to kind of spread the message. I don't know in what way it was spreading the message.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
You should try watching Blood Freak.
Yeah, that's another religious finance
funded.
Not the same group, right?
I don't think so.
No.
It feels more like they should have financed the remake then.
Yeah, right.
If they wanted to spread the word. Yeah.
And it's interesting to note that there was no word blob before this movie. Like the word blob did not exist. The shooting script was The Molten Meteor. I think it was the Sherwin-Williams poster where like there's paint kind of coming down and covering the globe. Mm-hmm. So they came up with, well, it could be like the glob that, conquered the globe. And they were going with the glob as their working title. But apparently another project already owned the rights to the glob. And so Jack Harris starts just going through the alphabet. It's the blob. That's what it is. It's the blob. And that's how we got the blob into our lexicon.
Yeah, I heard that some of the possible titles, one was The Glob That Girdled the Globe.
Girdled the globe.
And another
just
was
rolls off the tongue.
Absorbing Senior was another one too.
Oh,
what does that mean?
That sounds like a religious film. One final bit of trivia is the title song was composed by Burt Bacharach.
Was it?
It was. And the 5 blobs that are attributed to singing it, there's actually only one singer, Bernie Nee, and he's recorded 5 different times, on 5 different tracks and kind of just singing along with himself.
I love that song.
It is a bop.
The whole time.
It's a great song.
Who thought in 1958 that the last line would be so scary in 2023, as long as the Arctic stays cold? It's way scarier now than then. That might happen. The blob might be coming back.
Not only the blob, but other mayhem.
This film had so many great one-liners. I wrote down all my favorites. I mean, from the I hope the doctor is in, and then the doctor immediately being like, I'm gone for the weekend. So funny. I was the cool guy in the red shirt, he's like, gotta hang loose like me. And he like did this neck roll, and it was so funny. Just so many great one-liners that I will now be using in my everyday life.
In 1972, we had a sequel of sorts. And it does actually, it's called Beware the Blob. And it does follow the same storyline in that someone who's doing surveying in the Arctic Circle brings back a sample with him. And turns out to be a little bit of the Blob as well. Now, I'm thinking back to Reptilicus, where they're like drilling in the earth and coming up with samples, and they come up with a piece of Reptilicus. But this one, it's like they drilled right into the core of the Blob and just came out with just Blob. It's like there's no dirt, there's no nothing else. It's just pure Blob sample. So nice job. This film, and I hesitate to call it a film because it's a bit of like a collection of sketches or something.
Yeah.
With a blob tying them together. But it was directed by Larry Hagman, who of I Dream of Jeannie and Dallas fame. And it's his sole directorial effort.
I wonder why.
Yeah.
He didn't know where to point the camera, apparently. So
it very much feels like, Larry like went around to a couple of parties and went, hey, I'm making a movie. You want to come in? Because the cast is insane.
Yeah.
I can't believe how many stars and character actors and people like that show up on screen.
Burgess Meredith was in it.
Burgess Meredith is one of the hobos, along with Del Close, who ends up in the 1988 version. And the young bearded hobo is Larry Hagman himself.
Yeah.
All the best characters are just there for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Right.
I was asking for where's JR? I wanted Larry Hagman to be this slick businessman who maybe thinks that he can make some money on the Blob and everything. And I thought to myself, well, we're gonna get JR for sure. And then he's just there for a couple of seconds as a hobo.
As you mentioned, we have Burgess Meredith. We have Dick Van Patten, who was a big star on TV. Cindy Williams, who was in Laverne and Shirley. Sid Haig has a brief appearance. Garrett Graham. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all of these. But as you pointed out, Daniel, he only had them for probably a day or a couple of hours, and then they were on their way. And that's the way to make a low budget movie.
That doesn't have a plot until about 16 minutes into its 90-minute run. It finally has a plot.
The plot is the Blob is loose. That's the plot. Now, that said, and you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, Daniel, the Blob effects are actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
There's a great scene in the bowling alley where it comes out of all of the lanes at once. Obviously they do it with miniatures, but it's like, it looks really awesome. Yeah. And like the Blob coming over the car, and them on the inside, and they learn. We didn't mention this earlier, but the Blob is scared of cold. And so they kick on the air conditioning, and that sends the Blob a rolling away.
She did it by accident. when she was screaming and hugging her boyfriend, she kicked it on.
You kicked it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of 70s artifacts, like the pull tabs on beers. I'm like, I remember those. And I remember when they stopped making them, like, that's right. That was a terrible idea. Why did we ever have those in the first place?
Yeah, the guy 4 times in the beginning pulls it and throws it right into the can as he's drinking.
It feels like this wants to be a comedy. Like it's trying to be funny, but they didn't bother to write a script. It's just kind of like a lot of improvised. As a result, a lot of it's not very funny. And so you've got a comedy that isn't funny. And it's not really scary as a horror film. You get to see a monster in the form of this Blob eating people. I do have to give them kudos though, because the opening scene, the credits, is this little kitten kind of frolicking in a field, And apparently that was shot by Dean Cundy, or no, he was the camera operator for that.
Yeah.
And but then the little kitten is the first victim of the blob. And you're like, wow, okay, so we're gonna kill animals in this movie.
I do have to say, for a 70s low budget movie, the only nudity is an old guy running down the street naked who got scared away by the blob. I was
That's
like, oh,
right.
come on, what's that all about?
That actor is a professional wrestler, but he ended up in like quite a number of movies. If you look him up, it's like, what? I think he's billed as the Naked Turk in this film.
I was
Yeah, he
about to
did
say,
speak another language on the phone.
Larry Hagman apparently was a big fan of the original, and so he approached Jack Harris about doing this sequel. And some of the other films that Jack Harris, was behind, he did Dark Star, which was John Carpenter's when they extended his USC graduate project into a feature film. Jack Harris was the one who helped finance that. He also did Equinox, John Landis's Schlock, which is his first film, Dinosaurus, and The 4D Man. He definitely, he had a good run as a genre producer, and he usually picked films that were kind of silly but still fun.
I think that's the difference with this one, and it might have been due to Larry Hagman not being a director. I don't think they knew what kind of film they wanted to make, and I think that shows in the final picture.
I mean, it wants to be a comedy, and there's some comic stuff in the original as well. I think there's some stuff that's intended to be funny, but this one just feels kind of sloppy and slipshod. It doesn't feel like there was a lot of thought put into it, which is surprising considering how much thought and presumably money went into the special effects.
Well, it feels like an unaired TV pilot or something that never happened to a TV show, and it feels like the rough cut that they sent to the producer. Here's the thoughts. Maybe we can do something about that. And then the producer said, yes, fuck it. Put it on the
Let's just put it all in there.
Put it on in the theaters now.
It's a new series that lasts one episode.
Yeah.
Well, I listen to the commentary. Jack Harris said somebody had approached him about doing a Blob TV show. And he's like, what? Like the Blob's going to solve crimes, every week. So moving forward into a remake in 1988, this was directed by Chuck Russell. This was going to be his first film, but he ended up so impressing the folks at New Line Cinema with his pitch for the Blob that they gave him the job for directing Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.
cool.
And so this became his second film. And I think he learned quite a bit on the set of Dream Warriors in terms of handling these big kind of fantasy sequences, because there are so many great set pieces in the 1988 version. Daniel, I just want to point out, Daniel's beaming in from Sweden, by the way. And Daniel wrote the essay for the Blob 1988 for the book Hidden Horror. And so I'd like to kind of just throw the ball to you. You chose the Blob to write about for the essay.
Yeah.
What was your history with the remake?
The thing is, that's the point. I just saw the movie a couple of years before I wrote the essay. So I had never heard about it before. So when I watched it, I think it was 3 years before I wrote the essay. A friend of mine told me, "Hey, you want to watch the Blob remake?" And I thought to myself, "Well, is there a remake of the Blob?" so I said, "Okay, let's watch it." And I thought to myself, it's never going to be like The Thing or The Fly or Invasion of the Body Snatchers and anything like this. It's going to be like this schlock 70s version. And then we watched it, and I thought to myself, why haven't I never heard about this movie before? This is great. It's a great movie. And then I sat down on the internet to see what people said about this movie, and no one talked about it. No one. So I thought to myself, well, I don't understand why this movie is not that well received, or why no one is talking about it, because it's a great film. It's up to me. It's up there with The Fly and The Thing and those kind of movies.
It wasn't a big hit when it was released. I know it got a lot of press in like Fango and things like that, but it just didn't make a big hit, and it kind of developed a cult following on home video. But as you say, I still feel like it isn't one that is spoken of with the same regard as The Thing and The Fly and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I'm not sure why that is. I think part of it is kind of like the 80s quality of it. It's not quite as timeless.
I was waiting for this to come out because at the time I was reading Fango and I knew it was coming out. I knew who Chuck Russell was. So I was all excited about it. I knew who the effects guys were. I love this film, and it is really funny because when you get into those argument / discussions that remakes suck, The Thing and The Fly always come up, and this one very seldomly does, even though that's, like Daniel said, this is on par with the 80s remakes of those, because it takes the original, it keeps some of the original, but it's its own creature, so to speak. And it's done differently, but I think it's highly effective. The effects are amazing. And instead of killing a kitten, they kill a little kid, a little obnoxious one, but he gets absorbed. So I love this right from the beginning, but it is weird, to Daniel's point, that you have to be reminded, like if you're talking remakes, The Thing always comes up, and then The Fly, and then someone off in the corner will go, what about the Blob? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Chelsea, had you heard of this movie before?
I had. I think I had like spoiled myself a little bit watching more recent modern horror. So I just was like, I'm not going to even bother with that, because I didn't think it was going to scare me,
Mhm.
But then watching it was so fun. The effects were very effective, and the making it its own with the hazmat suit, scientists coming in. I loved that. I really thought it sort of breathed this new life into the original script with the sequel. I loved it. Even better one-liners. I mean, mean old nurse looking at him bleeding out, or something's wrong, and she goes, "Do you have Blue Cross?"
Mark, what was your first experience with it?
Yeah, I remember like seeing ads for it and stuff in the 80s, but I didn't see it back then, but only a little bit. And I do think I had read that the company that was Cinema Group Pictures, who was financing it, went bankrupt right before it was going to come out, and it got TriStar bought that company, and that they basically put it out like 3 or 4 months after it was initially supposed to come out, and pretty much did almost no marketing. And I think that's part of the reason it didn't catch on in the theaters, because if it had in the theaters, obviously I think its reputation would be different, but it just never did. The other thing I think that maybe the reason it's not looked at the same as The Thing and the other ones is that because it has a little bit of that comedic tone. It's not quite the serious movie. Like The Thing is not funny. The Fly is occasionally funny, but not in the same kind of way. And so it just, maybe that tone makes people not put it in there, even though obviously what it aimed to be, it did really well. And definitely took everything from the Blob and amped it up and did it better.
Yeah.
I do remember the first time I saw it, as soon as I saw Kevin Dillon, I was like, what is with that hair? And I know he hated it, and Chuck Russell made him and Shawnee Smith both get hair extensions, neither of which they wanted. But I think Kevin Dillon had just come off Platoon, so his hair was shortened. Chuck Russell wanted him to have the JD hair, I guess. I liked the way that it, unlike even a lot of horror movies, it kind of followed Psycho, where 4 or 5 of the main characters you think are gonna make it through or be a big part of the story all get killed like by halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool too, just to be like, oh yeah, I like that guy, or that woman, and we're gonna see, nope, you're not. You're gonna watch him die gruesomely.
Yeah, I mean, I love Candy Clark as our waitress. Like she has this kind of like maternal feel for all of the customers, and she's kind of sparking this romance with our sheriff Jeffrey DeMune, and you're like, you get invested in these characters. and then Chuck Russell kills them. It doesn't feel mean-spirited. And I think that's part of it. Is it doesn't feel like they're just cannon fodder like you see in so many slasher movies. Like it feels like they're genuine characters living in this space, and they just happen to step the wrong way and they fall in line with the blob. But I mean, that scene with her in the phone booth, it's terrible, because you're like, well, how's she going to get out of there? You're like, well, clearly she has to get out of there, right? And then you see like the sheriff's face like sliding down the glass, and you're like, oh, this is not good.
That makes that scene even more, because she's trapped, and it's like, how worse could it be? Oh, there's your would-be boyfriend half dissolved.
Well, and she's trying to call him. She's trying to call him on the phone,
right.
And he's like, "I'm right here, honey."
Yeah. He's the cop who should be saving her.
Right.
Well, I guess he's not coming. Well, he's coming, but not how I wanted him to come.
Yeah.
And I think he's a really likable character, even though he's kind of at odds with our Kevin Dillon character. Like I like the fact that we like these characters, and you're not like hoping for people to die.
I think that's the difference between this film and with the script. They develop these characters, even though they're not lasting, past page 30. They give the characters enough feel and life that you don't think, oh, he's going to be gone. He's going to be gone. They're not cannon fodder. I mean, they're real characters. So then when they do die, it's effective, even more so.
Yeah, that's the thing. Already in the start, you see the town from space, and then you get this feel of the entire town before the movie even starts. Really, you get to know this town in a way. It's very. It feels like Twin Peaks in a way, for the Twin Peaks feel, with the cop and the diner and the young people and the town itself, and the guy in the store with the rubber, and even the would-be rapist guy has this kind of body feel.
I wrote down, and that's what sexual predators get.
Yeah, he definitely gets his comeuppance.
Well, and is there a more 80s line than "Give me a pack of Trojans and a Banaka spray"? I was like, that was an awesome line.
Incredible.
I did want to mention too, like John mentioned, that even the characters that die, they developed. And as Darabont was a co-writer who obviously loves Stephen King,
right.
I wonder if that was some influence, because Stephen King is always good at that. Even when someone's about to die, you often are getting like inner dialogue from them. Like you're getting to meet this person as a person and not just the next victim.
Right.
And it is very effective. That it is. You're getting to know someone and then they're taken away. So I just wonder, I don't know. Because obviously Darabont throws in quite a few little Stephen King nods in this movie. Well, and probably Chuck Russell, but I wonder if that was an influence or not.
I randomly met Frank Darabont like 6 months ago. I was working at this luxury hotel in Montana, and him and his lovely wife were staying there. And I chatted with him a little bit, and we were talking about Westerns. He's the nicest guy.
That's awesome.
So when I saw his name, in the opening credits, I was like, Frank?
You're like, my buddy Frank.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's just, what a small world,
Well, that scene you mentioned at the beginning, Daniel, that idea of like, we go into the town and the town's deserted. And we're like, oh, what's happened? Something awful must have transpired. It's like, no, the whole town goes to the football game.
Yeah.
That's the kind of town this is, where everybody comes together as a community to watch this, to watch the team. And I love that kind of sets that. And like, even, the old bum in the woods who's watching Kevin Dillon try and jump his motorcycle, like he doesn't like go, you suck. He's like, nice job. That was impressive. Yeah. And then he collects this can and goes on his way. Like it feels like a nice town. And, it's the worst thing to happen to a nice town. Daniel, can you speak to the difference, as Chelsea pointed out, the difference in this blob, as opposed to it being kind of like just a menace from space? It is a man-made
Yeah.
biological weapon that's been sent up into space and been mutated and comes back down to Earth. And you mentioned that in your essay.
Yeah. The thing is, it's the U.S. government who has made this blob, and then it comes back to Earth, and it's bigger and more aggressive than they thought it would be. But the thing is, maybe not everyone will agree with me in this one, but I think it's more scary in a way, because as John said earlier, the first blob was this eating machine that wanted to consume us all. But the thing is, we don't know if the blob in the 50s can be reasoned with. Maybe it can. Maybe we can talk with it in a way and say, hey, let's eat some cows instead, or pork, or anything. But in this movie, it's just that it's a killing machine. You can't reason with it. It doesn't have that kind of intelligence. I don't think it's just programmed to kill.
Well, and the fact that
it's like the Terminator from space in a way.
Yeah.
Well, and the enemy is us, right?
Yeah.
It's our officials that have said, we're going to create this thing, and if a few of you have to die along the way, it's for the greater good. And so it creates that kind of mistrust of our, the people who are supposed to be taking care of us, that they're willing to sacrifice us in developing their killer weapon.
Well, and classic, like this will throw off the Russians or whatnot, classic 80s
Cold War.
us against the Russians. So love that.
Yeah. And as Mark said earlier, we are safe as long as the polars are holding. It feels like that today as well, with all the tension in the world, with the wars and the labs and everything. Maybe the Russians or someone will make this thing, or it feels more real today than it was in the 80s in a way.
I also got a feeling that almost like a Frankenstein angle, where I don't know if they created this or they created some sort of virus that they sent out into space.
I think that's it. Yeah.
And somehow it mutated or changed or something. So when it came back, I don't think they had a clue what exactly was going to come back. It was man-made originally,
because it becomes like a super weapon. And that is constantly, like any great scientific advance, it's like, well, how can we weaponize this or monetize this or both?
Yeah. Plus, I think they definitely had a nod to all the old monster movies, because you always see it in the older ones, like a building will fall on people running, and it's obviously a optical effect and stuff. Well, there's a scene where the big part of the blob comes slapping down on somebody just out of the movie, but then it comes back up and you see the guy inside on the bottom. So it's kind of like, we're going to take what we learned from those films, but we're going to update it a little bit.
Let's talk a little bit about the effects. John, you said you knew you were aware of like Tony Gardner and those guys. Yeah,
Tony Gardner was, again, one of the makeup superstars of the 80s. He did Darkman, and he did the half woman corpse from Return of the Living Dead. So he was one of the many effects companies on this. But he did a lot of the melting effects, and so cool. You just had top-notch guys in the 80s, and they were coming up with new ideas and new ways to do it, and coming up with ideas that they couldn't do back in the 70s and 60s because of technology. Now you want to have someone slowly dissolving. Yeah, okay, we can do that. We can do that all in camera. And that's, I think, one of the things that we're kind of like The Thing, where the effects are there and they still work. It doesn't look cheesy. It doesn't, watching this even recently, I think the effects still are working. They're still very effective as far as the makeup effects. Some of the visual effects are a little telling with the opticals, but I think for the most part, the makeup effects are still hold up really well.
Well, I think we've talked about this in other episodes, but I like the idea of being able to see being able to tell, yes, it's an effect, and like there's a coolness to the fact that it's an effect. Like if they were to do this today, it would be all CGI, and you just be like, okay, well, that was CGI, as opposed to going, how did they do that?
Yeah.
Like, like when it's coming up, on the ceiling behind them and they're running out of the store. I'm like, that's awesome. I know how they did that, but that's cool that they thought to do it that way.
Cool.
Like when the deputy gets pulled through the door,
right?
The blob wraps around his waist. You know how it's done, but it's one of those effects where you go, ooh, that's gotta hurt.
Yeah. And that's what I like about this, because I think you're right, John, that they said, and I think that was Chuck Russell's kind of pitch to Jack Harris, was like, we can do things with the blob that we couldn't do back in the 50s. Right. And we can show things that we couldn't have shown before. Like that shot of the character, Paul, our football guy, like him getting melted in the doctor's office. Not only is it a shock because that's our star, that's like been like our Steve McQueen character so far. It's like watching things peel away, and that there's no way that would be as cool these days with CGI. Like I literally don't know how they did that. And I don't want to know, because it looks so amazing.
I might ruin it for you a little then. They made like a cast of him that they were using as they did that. But for the initial shot where Shawnee Smith comes in and sees him, they actually had Donovan, is it Leach,
I think,
in there, and they just had like stuff, and they were just pulling it over his real face. So her initial reaction was like, "Oh my god, like that's really him." And then the rest, they used the kind of the mold they'd made and stuff. Yeah. But that was a super effective sequence, I thought, where it's stretched on his face.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody know about? I was reading up a little bit about the like blob quilt puppet that they had made for it to move. Can anybody speak on that?
They were using they used silk, and they would push silk through it. So basically, the silk was just saturated with the blob stuff, and then they would kind of just shake that around like a parachute almost.
Yeah.
And we had people who were in charge of the visual effects, people in charge of mechanical effects, and that the idea that they all kind of play in the same world, that it doesn't feel like, oh, this effect was handled by these folks over here, and this looks totally different over here. Like, you have these big kind of silk puppets, but you also have the tentacles that come out. You have just the kind of liquid ooze. It's a great, I love the fact that this blob has so much versatility to it. Yeah. Well, another film that's having its anniversary this year, The Crazies, George Romero's The Crazies, immediately I think of, when you see those hazmat suits, it's like they're trying to contain this thing that they created, and they're trying not to let anybody know about it. And if a few people have to die along the way, so be it. I was really kind of struck by those comparisons. And one of those folks in the hazmat suits is, of course, Bill Moseley. In one of his earliest roles, he had just done Texas Chainsaw 2, but this was the first gig that he actually got via a legitimate audition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's one of my favorite parts.
You do got to give out some kudos to Del Close as the preacher, because
let's talk about it.
He's a Chicago staple for the improv, and he has a very minor role, but he steals every scene that he is on screen. And the opening part at the pharmacy where he's grilling that kid, it's great. And then even more scary is the final scene,
right
at the revival tent. I mean, that's terrifying.
Yeah, there's a close-up shot of his face. I thought that was one of the scariest images in the whole movie.
Yeah,
it was really well done.
Well, and Del Close, has a brief moment in the 72 sequel, and he has an eye patch in that, and it's like, flashing forward to 1988 when you're also going to lose an eye, my friend.
And I heard it was his role in The Untouchables. I don't know who saw him, maybe Chuck Russell, but saw him in The Untouchables and said they contacted him, I think, to say, we want you to be in this.
Well, that was the first time I became aware of Del Close, was his, as you said, John, he has a small little part in Untouchables, but he's completely unforgettable. He has that great face, that great voice. And yeah, seeing him pop up in this, I was like, you're my new favorite character actor.
I did read too, one of the cool things, not even special effects, but stunts, was that the scene with the motorcycle jump. So it was the motorcycle jump, the helicopter, and the truck crashing. It was all one take in camera.
Right.
They
didn't
so
composite it. They didn't composite it
right,
together.
They synced it all up and made it all happen in one take.
Well, and that motorcycle jump, I mean, I'm sure you heard the same story, that apparently that stunt guy like landed the motorcycle and all the air blew out of the tires on the motorcycle, and that guy's like basically just holding the motorcycle up with his legs and his arms and like trying to ride it out, not like completely wipe out. There's that the soldier who's kind of like half eaten that Shawnee Smith rolls over toward the end, and that is an actual stuntman. I forget his name right now, but like he actually is missing an arm, missing legs, and they just attached all the goo onto him. So, but that's an actual guy that they roll over, and it's revealed that, you know, he's been melted
because he's like a triple amputee or something. He will play parts where they need things like that.
And again, I think that just speaks to Chuck Russell's, you know, like wanting to get as much stuff in the camera as possible, like happening in real time. We barely touched on Shawnee Smith, but she's terrific. Like she's a great, like she just takes the lead and runs with it. Even though, you know, Kevin Dillon is our lead male, like she holds her own opposite him and ends up saving him a couple times. So
when it's so cool to see her in this, knowing her work in the Saw universe, I loved her as Amanda in Saw, and to see, you know, basically her early horror acting origin, so lovely to see.
And she got Saw because of this movie.
Oh, did she?
James Wan and Lee Wanell were like, we both grew up watching this and had a crush on her. And so they wanted her to be in Saw. And she doesn't like horror movies. She doesn't like being scared. And so
that's
funny.
So
she
wild.
Kind of became a scream queen anyway.
Yeah. She fleshed that character out so well, which could have easily been two-dimensional, you know?
Yep. Or just like another, you know, another female that needed to be saved, you know, like this was, you know, like Aliens had come out a couple of years before. So it's like the idea of having a really strong female lead was attractive. And I think she does a great job. I think Kevin Dillon does a fine job as well. Kind of as our not so bad boy, you know, very much kind of in that Steve McQueen role.
Yeah. And that's how you do it with the strong female characters that we want today. If we go back and watch like Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor and Meg in this movie, that's how you do it. Because when I think of this movie, I don't think about Kevin Dillon. I think about Shawnee Smith. Mm-hmm. She's the lead character for me.
Yeah.
She's still a woman. She's still a female.
Yeah.
And she is capable and she is intelligent. I mean, she saves one of the kids at least.
There's a great story with Chuck Russell being interviewed, that the script originally they said, "Oh, this is fine. You can't kill a kid," and he's like, "Oh yes, I can, and I will," and he does, and they got crap for that, but he wanted to make that point.
Well, it's the surprises, right? You know, like he's looking. He talked a little bit on one of the commentaries. Shout Factory has an amazing Blu-ray release of this, by the way. So if any of the people are watching who are fans of it, definitely pick up that. It's got 3 commentary tracks, got a ton of like interviews with people, including Bill Moseley. But on the commentary track, Chuck Russell talks about how comedy and horror very much operate on the same wavelength, in that you're looking to surprise, you're looking to misdirect. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, John, is the idea of like, you set things up, you know, you can't kill a kid. Like that's just established. And it's like, oh no, if you can kill a kid, kind of the way like with Psycho, where you don't kill your lead actor and then you do, and you suddenly feel like, oh shoot, anything can happen. I'm in the hands of, you know, somebody who's dangerous.
That whole opening is a total Psycho homage, because they set that character up as the main guy, because up until that, he's the all-American hero.
Right.
And even though you do get a little bit, and I love the fact that this is hometown America, but you do get that sense of, if you're an outsider like Flag, like Kevin Dillon, we don't like you. They are immediately not going to believe him. And this all-American hero has that same mentality that you're a bad guy. We don't like you.
Right.
And that's it. And so it does give you, it makes everything more real. But for him to die in the first 15, 20 minutes or whatever, you're like, kudos to you guys.
Didn't see that coming.
I wanted to read a couple of my favorite quotes because this is also was just full of great one-liners. I think my favorite is, "Boy doesn't need condoms, he needs a muzzle." That was so fantastic for me. And then when Kevin Dillon's character, I had been talking like out loud to myself, like, it just looks like strawberry jam in the original 1958, and he like slices something and it's actually a strawberry jam jar, and he goes, "Great, I killed the strawberry jam." Just love that. And the whole time I was watching the original, the 1958, I just kept thinking, if they remade this today, I just would really love Bill Skarsgård to play Steve. After seeing him in Barbarian, I think he would be the perfect person to play, and that is my dream remake of the remake.
Great.
Would be Bill Skarsgård in that.
Except
Get
we
on
probably
that.
couldn't have him playing a teen.
Yeah. No, we
He's
have
Wouldn't
older
be
than
any
Steve
different
McQueen
than
now.
Steve McQueen.
yeah, we definitely have to, justify that. But I would just love him in a Blob remake. I think he would be so great in it.
The thing is, he's a Swede, so he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, there we go.
The part of Brian Flagg was actually offered to Steve McQueen's son Chad, and
Oh,
he
right.
turned it down because he's like kind of didn't want to trade on his dad's movies and names. Maybe he should have, because the only thing we really remember him from is his kind of small part in Karate Kid as like the bleached blonde, Cobra Kai guy. The other one is when Shawnee Smith's up on top of the Snowmaker with the M16, and she says, "Come on, you can do better than that." That is Kevin Dillon's character Bunny in Platoon. It's like his dying words. It's what he says right before he gets killed. So I had to be intentional, I would think.
Yeah.
But
Kevin wanders over in the middle. And you know what you should say up on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, with the character Flag, there also we talked about Stephen King. He has the jacket and the long hair, and in the Stephen King books there are a character called Randall Flagg, who is the
Right. That's how he's described.
the main evil in The Stand and a couple of other books. So.
And Shawnee Smith was in the 94 miniseries.
Yeah.
So cool.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was super fun. I'm glad we get to celebrate the Blob on their respective anniversary dates. And we will be getting this gang back together really soon. It's been a blast. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.